Grand Theft Auto has done more than just dominate the gaming industry. It has actively influenced pop culture globally for decades, incited political crusades, and broken more sales records than any other product to come out of the entertainment industry as a whole. Yet, the architects behind the franchise virtually remain ghosts. Rockstar Games operates with a level of secrecy that rivals intelligence agencies, burying the glorious chaos of their creative process well away from the public eye. But 30 years of history cannot be completely hidden. So today, I'd like to welcome you to the entire behind-the-scenes history of Grand Theft Auto, unpacking everything from raw development hurdles and forgotten production archives to toxic internal wars, explosive public controversies, and the secrets you were never meant to discover. We're pulling back the curtain on what actually happened during the development of these games and how the series has evolved into what it is today. And to do that, we have to start right at the beginning.
Now, all the people in here are working on what DMA hopes will be its new blockbuster. It's a game called Grand Theft Auto. It's got to be finished by the end of June, so they're involved in some pretty hard work in here. It's all about a car chase through the streets of a fictional, probably American city. Here are some of the maps they've been working on.
It's May 1996, and a small team of developers from Dundee, Scotland called DMA Design are hard at work on a brand new game called Grand Theft Auto, a game the world had never yet heard of. In fact, this old BBC Working Lunch episode where we got to see a little behind the scenes was the public's very first introduction to GTA, which is why Dave Kivlin, a prominent member of the development team who worked only on GTA 1, has to explain the basic concept of what they're building to journalist Rory Cellan-Jones, basically like a kindergartner. A top-down, open-world, action-adventure game where you play as a criminal, stealing cars, completing missions, and causing as much chaos as possible across 3 different cities. At the time, that idea alone was almost unheard of. Most games up until the mid-90s were very light-hearted, or had you playing the hero saving the day, a game that put you in the shoes of the villain, the anti-hero or criminal, whatever you want to call it, simply wasn't something mainstream games did. However, at this point, GTA 1 was still a huge work in progress, not dropping until roughly a year and a half after this Working Lunch episode aired. Just a handful of developers, most of them barely experienced, working out of a cramped studio with minimal resources, and really not much belief from anyone that what they were building would ever amount to anything. And yet, without knowing it, they were laying the foundation for a game that would become embedded in pop culture for decades to come, because many of the core features that would go on to define the franchise were born here, such as the simple concept of having the ability to steal any car you see on the street, wanted levels, the iconic wasted screen that would become a staple of the series, and an in-game radio featuring multiple stations across different genres of music. Although rather than licensing popular songs, at first every track was composed entirely in-house by their own music department. But as impressive as it was, this small and inexperienced team was pulling all of this together. Even figuring out the direction they were heading with the game was a battle in itself. Originally, the game started life under the name Race and Chase, a cops and robbers game where you could play as either side. However, the team quickly came to a realization. As Gary Penn, the creative director of the game, later put it, nobody wanted to be the cop. It's just more fun to be bad. So they scrapped the police angle, went all in on the criminal side, and everything changed from there. But even with a clear direction, actually building the game was where the wheels really started to come off. For example, Gary Penn stated that the writers were driving the game one way while the level designers were driving it another, and they weren't meeting in the middle, so they'd end up with missions that made no sense in the context of the world they were being built in, and a game that didn't hold together. The milestones they had set to show the publishers things were moving forward were not being met, meaning at any point the whole thing could have been shut down completely. And as it turns out, that's exactly what the US publishers wanted to do.
A matter of months, we had the US, because we'd have conference calls every week, at least once a week with the US. They wanted to kill it every week, and I think this is amazing. Every week they wanted to kill this game, and we'd have to kind of argue to try and keep it going because we had some faith.
Every single week, the US publishers were pushing to have this game cancelled, and every single week the team had to fight to keep it alive. And it wasn't just the publishers they had to convince. Inside DMA Design itself, Grand Theft Auto was considered bottom of the pile, meaning nobody inside the studio wanted to work on it, so the team that did end up working on it had barely any experience between them. For example, Paul Farley, the game's level designer, revealed that only one person on the team had actually shipped a game before. Colin Anderson, who was the head of audio, admitted acquitted himself that he was just 22 and knew nothing. And yet, they all kept going despite everything working against them. But by the time they were approaching the finish line, the game was still barely holding together. It had reached the point where there were so many things still being crammed in that getting it out the door was the only way to stop it from collapsing under its own weight. And it really did go right down to the wire. The PlayStation version, which wouldn't actually release until 2 weeks after the PC version, still had to be locked and submitted for approval a full month before the PC build was even finished, which meant that the PC version itself was only completed about a week before it hit shop shelves. A week! So they were literally still fixing bugs and changing features right up until the absolute last minute. But against all odds, they got it done. November 28th, 1997, and Grand Theft Auto was out. However, it wouldn't be a GTA release without some media controversy, and the publishers behind the game had a plan to make sure it created a firestorm.
Good shot, kid. I think you got him. Good shot, kid. I think you got him.
What unfolded was the result of one of the most calculated marketing campaigns in video game history. Because the controversy didn't happen by accident, the publishers behind Grand Theft Auto had secretly hired a publicist named Max Clifford, one of the most notorious PR men in the UK, with one specific goal: generate as much outrage as possible. And Max Clifford knew exactly what he was doing. He started leaking stories to British tabloids about the game's violent content months before it even came out, feeding exaggerated stories of hit-and-run missions and glorified crime sprees directly to right-wing politicians in Parliament, including Lord Campbell of Croy, who then stood up in the House of Lords and publicly condemned the game. And all of this was happening in May 1997, a whole 6 months before the game was even released. One of the co-creators of GTA 1 and 2, Mike Daly, flat out stated that Max Clifford made it all happen. He designed all the outcry, which pretty much guaranteed MPs would get involved. He told them his entire plan, exactly who he would target, and how those people targeted would react, and basically every word he said indeed came true. But the developers themselves didn't expect it to go anywhere near as far as it did. In fact, nobody on the team really understood the scale of the backlash at the time, because to them they'd just been making a fun game. They weren't pulling all-nighters in that little studio in Dundee thinking they were making something dangerous. They were just trying to finish the damn thing without it falling apart.
The controversy thing really got out of hand quite quickly, and it took everyone by surprise, because we had been developing a game that was all about the fun, but Max Clifford was astonishing.
But whether they expected it or not, it worked. The people trying to ban the game were inadvertently doing all the marketing for it. And when GTA 1 finally came out in November 1997, it sold 500,000 copies within 3 months and 3 million copies within its first 3 years. Enter Rockstar Games. Following the success of Grand Theft Auto 1, BMG Interactive was acquired by Take-Two Interactive in 1998. Sam and Dan Houser, who had been executives at BMG, moved to New York, and by the end of that same year had established a brand new publishing label under Take-Two, Rockstar Games. And with Rockstar now at the helm, a sequel was already on the way.
Sound shaking, earth quaking.
Dispatch to Haley 1, do you still have visual contact?
That's a negative. Suspect has abandoned vehicle.
DMA Design, the same team of people who'd fought tooth and nail to get the first game out the door, were back at their desks in Dundee, building Grand Theft Auto 2. The whole plan was to refine, polish and expand on their controversial formula, but overall it didn't find itself innovating that much. One developer even joked that it was basically moving the franchise only 5 minutes forward, something when you think about it you can rarely say about a mainline Grand Theft Auto title. Under development, the game was codenamed GBH, which in English and Welsh law stands for grievous bodily harm, and for a while they were actually considering calling the game A Stole a Motor, Scottish slang for stealing a car, but thankfully the team realised nobody outside of Scotland had any idea what that meant, so Grand Theft Auto 2 it was. And rather than basing the world on any real place, DMA Design built Anywhere City, a retro-futuristic metropolis set in an unspecified amount of time in the future. The design document for GTA 2 referenced the famous quote from the 80s TV show show, Max Headroom, 20 minutes into the future, as the creative direction. The visual inspiration drawn from some of the most iconic dystopian films made in the late 1900s, such as Blade Runner, Brazil, and Akira. Promo material for the game described Anywhere City as a completely dysfunctional urban hell. And when it came to marketing the game, this sort of creative uniqueness carried over into how they were going to sell it to the world, commissioning a live-action short film that would go alongside the game's release. It's 8 minutes of live action, shot in New York City in 1999, with the World Trade Center visible in the background in some shots. There's no dialogue at all, just music and a simple story following the protagonist of the game called Claude Speed, a small-time crook who works his way through New York's criminal underworld, playing multiple gangs against each other for money and favors. He carjacks his way around the city, double-crosses everyone he works for, and by the end, one of the gangs he's betrayed catches up with him. Dan Houser actually wrote it himself, and the lead role of Claude Speed was played by Scott Malson, Jack Branning from EastEnders for anyone watching in the UK. Dan Houser even cast himself in it as an uncredited monk riding in a stepvan. It was easily the most ambitious piece of marketing for GTA they'd produced at that point. Though granted, GTA 2 was only the second game, but to this day it's still actually one of the bravest things they've ever done on that front. And more than that, it showed us Rockstar wasn't just trying to make games. They were building a brand that their fans could connect to, something that felt like it existed beyond the screen. The box art for this game also has this real raw energy about it, which might have something to do with the fact that they actually went to the top of the Empire State Building in New York, pointed a camera down at the street below and photographed a random yellow cab passing by. And that was the cover for Grand Theft Auto 2. However, despite Rockstar publishing the game, they didn't actually own the studio making it. DMA Design had been passed around like a hot potato, sold to British publisher Gremlin Interactive back in 1997, then Gremlin was acquired by French publisher Infogrames in 1999 for £24 million, meaning the team building Grand Theft Auto were effectively owned by a company that had absolutely nothing to do with Rockstar. And throughout all of this, the people inside the studio were feeling it. According to former employees, the relationship between the team at DMA and the various owners above them was tense throughout this entire period. Staff were distrustful, unsettled, and increasingly at odds with the direction things were heading. Every ownership change had a real cost on the people sitting at those desks just trying to make great games. And it wasn't until September 1999, just 1 month before GTA 2 was released, that Take-Two finally bought DMA Design outright from Infogrames for £1, the price of a can of Coke, with the small caveat of taking on $11 million worth of debt. GTA 2 launched on October 22nd, 1999, and reviews were mixed. Despite over 1.2 million copies being shipped to stores worldwide at launch, expected to generate more than $33 million in revenue, it still wouldn't come close to GTA 1's overall lifetime sales. And amid all of the internal upheaval within DMA due to all the corporate acquisitions, Dave Jones, the co-founder of DMA Design and one of the original creative driving forces behind Grand Theft Auto, left the studio altogether following Take-Two Interactive's purchase of it. So by March 2000, the Dundee studio DMA Design, as the world had known it, was closed permanently. The remaining staff relocated to Edinburgh, and with that, an era was over. But in this new studio, something was already taking shape that would change gaming forever, and the biggest chapter in the franchise's history was only just beginning. Following the mixed reception of GTA 2, a core team of just 23 people, mostly the same developers who had worked on Body Harvest and Space Station Silicon Valley, such as Leslie Benzies, Obi Vermey and Aaron Garbett, wanted to break free from the top-down perspective. You see, this now legendary trio had spent years working on the 3D side of DMA Design, specifically on the innovative N64 games Body Harvest, a third-person open-world action-adventure, and Space Station Silicon Valley, a creative 3D platformer where you inhabit the bodies of different animals to solve puzzles across a fallen space station. Working on those games exposed them to the power of a fully navigable 3D environment, experiencing firsthand how a 3D third-person camera could unlock visual storytelling, immersive physics, and a realistic sense of scale that flat pixels simply couldn't compete with. So having tasted that creative freedom, going backward to a top-down game felt counterintuitive. In fact, DMA supported engineer Alan Jack described the original internal pitch for GTA 3 as explicitly combining Body Harvest's open-world exploration with Space Station Silicon Valley's level design. But the team didn't go straight into building GTA 3. The project they actually started with was something completely different. They began building a prototype for a Godzilla game, a destructible 3D city where you played as a massive kaiju monster that could tear through buildings, throw objects, and watch city blocks collapse in real time. However, it was never really meant to be an actual game. With some downtime between projects and access to a couple of Dreamcast dev kits, the team were essentially just playing around, seeing what was possible. Just a small group of developers experimenting with new hardware to see if they could build a convincing 3D city. And crucially, while the Edinburgh team were doing this, the remaining Dundee team were simultaneously working on an entirely separate GTA project of their own, codenamed Grand Theft Auto 2.5, a top-down isometric 3D game set in Miami. Two different teams, two completely different visions for the future of the franchise, running simultaneously. And the last thing the Edinburgh team wanted was to cause internal conflict by openly developing a 3D successor, while the other team were hard at work on their own version. One developer described it as not wanting to cause a bloodbath. So they kept it quiet, kept it under the Godzilla label, and let the work speak for itself. As Obi Vermey later recalled, the team were very deliberate about staying under the radar until they had something concrete to show. But what they ended up building was something truly astonishing for its time. A fully navigable 3D city filled with moving vehicles, pedestrians walking the streets, and buildings lining every block. And when Sam Houser saw it, even in its earliest, most broken state, he knew immediately this was exactly what he'd been waiting for. In his own words, it was mind-blowing. I was like, oh man, if we do this in proper 3D, it's going to be insane. Dan Houser's reaction was slightly different, stating, "What did I think when I first saw it? Well, to begin with, I had the natural reaction of, what is Sam talking about? The code would literally run for 10 seconds and crash. But when you started playing, you understood the magic." And Harron Garbett, the art director who had helped build the prototype, later summed up the team's mindset perfectly. "We were young and arrogant and made a conscious decision to redirect the project to be GTA. We knew that we could do it. The prototype did exactly what it needed to do, and Sam, who'd always wanted to take GTA into 3D, gave the green light immediately. Take-Two chose Edinburgh and the full 3D version over the Miami 2.5 project, which was quietly cancelled when the Dundee studio closed in March 2000, though that setting wouldn't stay buried for long. And so, from August 1999, 23 people in a studio in Edinburgh got to work. What followed was 27 months of building something the games industry had never seen before. The first major decision was the platform. The prototype had been built on Dreamcast dev kits, but 4 months into development, the team made the call to switch to PlayStation 2. The Dreamcast simply wasn't commercially viable. Obi Vermey described it as a genuinely disappointing decision. The team loved the Dreamcast, but business was business. From day one, the technical challenges were unlike anything the team had faced before. One of the biggest problems they ran into was the streaming. The PS2 only had 32 megabytes of memory, enough for just a couple of city blocks around the player at any one time, but the total assets that made up Liberty City came to around 130 megabytes, nearly 4 times what the console could hold at once. So as the player moved through the city, new graphics had to be constantly loaded from the DVD, but the DVD drive was painfully slow, causing buildings to be completely invisible until they suddenly popped into view right in front of you. So the team got creative. They deliberately slowed the player's movement speed down to give the city more time to load. Portland Island originally had a long straight road running all the way down it, but that let players drive too fast and the streaming couldn't keep up, so they changed the road layout entirely to slow players down and even slightly increased the air resistance on vehicles in certain areas. The city itself went through a significant creative overhaul during development. Dan Houser originally described the early version of Liberty City as a generic hybrid, a blend of Chicago, Pittsburgh, Detroit, New York and Philadelphia all rolled into one. But as the team actually started building missions and stories within it, they realised that basing it more firmly on a single real city gave them so much more to say about it. So they redesigned Liberty City to be much more closely modelled on New York. Portland representing Brooklyn, Staunton Island representing Manhattan, and Shoreside Vale representing parts of New Jersey and Staten Island. Now, a lot of what you're about to hear next comes from an incredibly rare source, the official GTA 3 design document, a physical document dated December 29th, 2000, almost a year before the game released, originally distributed distributed to department leads and developers during production. This document was tracked down and purchased on eBay for $1,025 by a YouTube channel called GTA Series Videos, one of the most dedicated GTA research channels on the internet that's been posting Grand Theft Auto content since 2007, pretty much since YouTube's inception. Rather than keeping it to themselves, they shared everything, breaking it all down in a nearly 2-hour-long video. So, a huge thank you to GTA Series Videos. If you want the full deep dive, their video is linked in the description. And what this document reveals about how GTA 3 was originally conceived is quite fascinating. For starters, the original story of GTA 3 was completely different to what we ended up with. The villains weren't the Colombian cartel at all. They were a mysterious, unnamed gang referred to only as the Masks, a shadowy criminal organisation with no clear identity. And Claude's story didn't begin with a betrayal by Catalina. He was simply ambushed by the Masks during a heist gone wrong. The personal betrayal angle, the Catalina character, the Colombian cartel, all of that came later in development. Even Claude having no voice wasn't part of the original plan. On page 172 of the design document, Claude actually has written dialogue for 2 specific missions. So a talking Claude was absolutely on the table at some point, but the audio department were already overwhelmed by having to voice dozens of NPCs, along with 9 radio stations and an entire cast of characters. And so a corner that had to be cut ended up becoming one of the most iconic design choices in the series. The list of features that never made it into the final game from this document is also remarkable. GTA 3 was originally going to have split-screen multiplayer with 5 different game modes: deathmatch, points, races, stunt races, and tag. NPCs called grasses were also planned, civilians who would run to the nearest phone box and report Claude to the police if they spotted him doing something illegal, a feature Rockstar ended up using years later in another one of their games, The Warriors. And then there's Darkle, one of the most mysterious cut characters in the franchise. According to the design document, Darkle was an insane bomb maker who wandered Liberty City and always seemed to have some heinous job for Claude, described as a stinky, shuffling prophet of the apocalypse. He was supposed to give Claude 5 missions in total, essentially replacing the kill frenzies from GTA 1 and 2, but his missions kept getting cut one by one until Rockstar pulled him from the game entirely. They addressed him in a 2011 Q&A, confirming he was removed long before any 9/11 related changes, and that despite years of fan speculation, none of his missions involved Russian communists blowing up a school bus or flying planes into buildings. And with the game stripped of everything that couldn't make the cut by mid-2001, it was finally coming together. And in June that same year, Rockstar brought GTA 3 to E3 in Los Angeles, the biggest gaming event in the world.
The original game was based on watching too many American movies and watching all that overhead helicopter chase footage, which was the only camera we could use due to the limitations on the old hardware. But we always wanted to make an action movie when you actually felt like you were controlling a real character. And that's what we've done this time.
But surprisingly, nobody really cared all that much. GTA 3 was mostly overlooked, as all the attention was on Halo, Zelda, and Metal Gear Solid 2. Sam Houser later admitted he was shocked by how little interest the game generated at the event. But rather than deflating the team, it only made them more determined. They went back to Edinburgh and kept polishing, still certain they had something revolutionary on their hands. Then, on the morning of September 11th, 2001, just 6 weeks before GTA 3 was set to release, everything changed. Following the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center, Rockstar's offices in Manhattan couldn't be accessed for days. And with a game set in a city modelled on New York, filled with crime, violence and satire, weeks away from releasing, Rockstar went back through the game with a fine-tooth comb. A mission referencing terrorists was removed, dialogue was altered, flight paths of planes near buildings were changed, and the police car colours, originally designed to resemble the NYPD's blue and white livery, were switched to black and white. But Rockstar later confirmed the game ended up being only about 1% different as a result of 9/11. The biggest change of all, though, was the cover art. The original GTA 3 cover was deemed too raw for the American market in the immediate aftermath of the attacks, so Rockstar redesigned it in a single evening. Drawing inspiration from the collage style of 1960s movie posters, they created the iconic split panel design we know and love today. Sam Houser said the new cover was instantly preferred over the original, and that design, created overnight out of necessity, became became the signature visual style for the series moving forward. GTA 3 launched on PlayStation 2 on October 22nd, 2001. The same journalists who had barely glanced at it at E3 4 months earlier were now giving it perfect scores. It became the best-selling game of 2001, then the second best-selling game of 2002, beaten only by its own sequel. It sold over 14.5 million copies, and the industry was never the same again. 23 people in a studio in Edinburgh had just changed gaming forever, and DMA Design, the studio that had started life above a chip shop in Dundee, was officially renamed Rockstar North in May 2002, the branch that would go on to become Rockstar's most recognisable studio and redefine what modern open world gaming looks like. Before the dust could even settle from GTA 3's massive success, Rockstar was already working on their next major Grand Theft Auto title, but without even realising it yet. According to Laszlo Jones, work began on Vice City just 1 month after GTA 3 was released. However, what they were building wasn't intended to be a brand new game at all. That's right, Vice City was originally planned as a mission pack / DLC for GTA 3. Just a short storyline, a new map, some new weapons to have fun with, and a few new vehicles. A quick turnaround to basically capitalise on GTA 3's extraordinary momentum. It was the Hauser brothers in Rockstar New York who had their hearts set on an 80s Miami setting, and Rockstar North just started building it on top of the GTA 3 codebase with no major code changes. Only once Grand Theft Auto 3 kept selling the way it did, and Vice City started looking sufficiently different from what came before it, was the decision made roughly 6 months into development to make it a standalone game. Dan Hauser described the inspiration as simply Scarface, Miami Vice, and our 80s childhoods. Throughout development, the team watched Miami Vice constantly as a reference point. Art director Aaron Garbett used the series specifically as a reference for the neon lighting, and in recreating an 80s setting, the team found it relatively painless, given the distinct culture of the era and their personal familiarity with it. But they didn't just watch films and call it a day. The entire development team was packed off on an all-expenses paid research trip to Miami Beach, splitting into small groups, walking the streets, taking photographs and absorbing everything. The architecture, the light, the colours, the way the sun hit the Art Deco buildings on Ocean Drive. Aaron Garbett later said basing the city on Miami made things pretty easy because Miami is just such a visually distinct place. But there was one element of this world they had to get right to nail that 80s Miami Vice atmosphere, which is the music. Every GTA before this relied almost entirely on original compositions, avoiding the cost and legal complexity of licensing real tracks. Grand Theft Auto 3 had dipped its toe in, but Vice City was a completely different scale entirely because of the atmosphere they were trying to sell. You can't sit there in a studio and manufacture something even remotely close to Billie Jean or Out of Touch or I Ran. The era had a sound that was completely unique and inimitable, and if this game was going to transport people there, it needed the actual thing. So, Rockstar went ahead and got it. Over 100 fully licensed songs spread across multiple radio stations covering every genre the decade had to offer. Pop, metal, hip-hop, new wave, R&B, Michael Jackson on the same soundtrack as Megadeth, Tears for Fears next to Herbie Hancock. It was an enormous undertaking, a massive financial investment, and a licensing operation the studio had never attempted at anything close to this scale. And pulling it off came down to who was actually running Rockstar. Before co-founding the company, Sam Hauser had spent years working at BMG, one of the biggest music labels in the world. He knew how record labels operated, he knew the industry, he knew the people, and he knew who to call, and he leveraged every one of those connections to make it happen. The result was a soundtrack so carefully curated it didn't feel like a playlist, it felt like a time machine. Every station was a different entry point into 1986 Miami, and for an entire generation of players, many of whom weren't even born in the 80s, Vice City was their first introduction to half of these songs. However, all of that music came with a catch nobody talked about at the time. Licenses expire, and years later when Rockstar tried to re-release the game digitally, songs started vanishing one by one as deals ran out, including multiple Michael Jackson tracks. The version of Vice City that millions of people grew up with, the complete version, technically no longer exists in any official release. But the world was only half of it. If Vice City was truly going to be brought to life, it needed a worthy cast. And oh boy did Rockstar deliver.
Try this at home sometime. This shit is hardcore. Hell yeah. You know, but you gotta see, once they put this shit together, it's gonna be what they say, boss. the hook.
For $320, give him a stick. I mean, shit, let him. I'll take an ass whipping for $320.
I stick my neck out for nobody.
This is a disaster. We are so screwed, man. I was in it.
That was perfect.
I was in it.
That was excellent.
It felt so good.
It's so funny that the only thing that I'd ever do, and it's this.
Yeah.
You know, the most nastiest thing ever.
Funny old guy recently, right?
Don't take it personally, my dear.
Look, you know what Lucky stands for? L-U-C-K-Y? L-U-C-K-Y means living under correct knowledge yearly.
What Rockstar had quietly assembled was an elite-level Hollywood cast, the kind you'd expect to see on a film poster outside a movie theatre, not a silly PlayStation 2 video game. Ray Liotta, the star of Goodfellas as Tommy Vercetti, the first fully voiced protagonist in the history of the franchise. William Fichtner as Ken Rosenberg, Luis Guzman as Ricardo Diaz, Burt Reynolds as Avery Carrington, Fairuza Balk as Mercedes Cortez, Danny Dyer as Kent Poole, Gary Busey as Phil Cassidy, and Philip Michael Thomas, the actual Ricardo Tubbs from Miami Vice itself, as Lance Vance. And the list goes on. It was jaw-dropping. But as you can imagine, when you're dealing with that many Hollywood egos in one project, things were never going to go entirely smoothly behind the scenes. And let's just say, not everyone on that list was a pleasure to work with. Dan Houser later recalled that during one recording session, he and Burt Reynolds got into a heated argument over the direction of a scene. It escalated to the point where Burt reportedly turned to the room and yelled, "Get the limey out of here." The sessions were so hostile that Dan Houser apparently considered cutting him from the game entirely. But Rockstar never forgot about it. Years later, when they brought Burt Reynolds' character Avery Carrington back in Liberty City Stories, they killed him off immediately, had his body eaten by another character, and revealed mid-scene that he'd been wearing a wig the entire time. A petty, perfect act of revenge buried inside a PSP spin-off. Classic Rockstar at the time. Then there was Ray Liotta, who director of production Navid Konsari described as frequently difficult on set. Sam Houser later said that in some sessions he was into it, but then sometimes he was very cold and couldn't work. Ray Liotta himself later admitted he'd done the game purely for the money, and after feeling he'd been underpaid when Rockstar came back asking for a cameo in San Andreas, he said no, making GTA Vice City the only game he ever appeared in, which in hindsight only adds to the legend of it. However, it was these experiences that made Rockstar rethink their approach to celebrity casting. They'd still go big on San Andreas, but never quite at the same caliber as Vice City. Over a decade later, Dan Houser eventually put it plainly, stating, "We don't bring in name actors anymore because of their egos. But for one game built in 9 months, Rockstar had created something that transcended the medium, and the numbers reflected it." Grand Theft Auto Vice City launched on October 29th, 2002. It sold 500,000 copies within the first 24 hours, and 1.4 million in its first 3 days, making it the fastest selling game in history at the time. It went on to sell 17.5 million copies in total, outselling GTA 3 and becoming the best-selling game of 2002. 2 games in 2 years, both the best-selling titles on the planet back to back. But Rockstar wasn't even close to being finished, because even as Vice City was flying off shelves, Rockstar North were already building something bigger, something that would take everything Vice City had done and blow the roof off it entirely.
Still, this is a thriving industry, violent video games, selling more than $6 billion in software just last year.
Hi, Anthony Sullivan here with a great new invention that'll change your life. No more boring conversations or dull evenings. No more envy at other people's happy, successful lives. All this from one amazing product, Grand Theft Auto Vice City.
After Vice City became a worldwide phenomenon, Rockstar had a target on their back. By 2003, the video games are dangerous conversation in America had reached fever pitch. Congress was holding hearings, parent groups were organising, and news networks were running segment after segment about the corrupting influence of violent video games on children. And sitting right at the centre of all of it, the most controversial name in the entire industry was Rockstar Games. And leading the charge was an American activist called Jack Thompson, a Florida attorney who had made it his personal mission to bring Rockstar down. Jack Thompson had spent years targeting violent media such as rap music, films and television, but GTA was his obsession. He began targeting the franchise in early 2003, attempting to insert himself into a murder case in Ohio, arguing that GTA 3 had essentially trained the teenage killer to commit the crime. The defense strategy was so absurd that the perpetrator himself ultimately rejected Thompson's help. firing him from the case entirely. But that didn't stop him on his witch hunt. Just a few months later, in June 2003, when an 18-year-old named Devin Moore walked into a police station in Alabama, grabbed an officer's gun and killed 3 people, then calmly told authorities life is like a video game, Jack Thompson immediately pointed the finger at Vice City. He called the game a murder simulator on national television and went on cable news making unsubstantiated claims about what players could do in the game. He even personally videotaped Miami Best Buy selling a copy of Vice City to a child, then sent a letter to the company's headquarters warning of prosecutions if they didn't stop. He was a relentless Karen, yet the more coverage he got, the more games Rockstar sold. Cuban and Haitian American communities in Florida had also taken serious issue with how their communities were portrayed in the game, and specifically with a mission objective that literally appeared on screen reading, "Kill the Haitians." Protests were organised in Florida, and the story ended up hitting national news, and by late 2003, a full year after the game had launched, Rockstar issued a public apology and committed to releasing a censored version of Vice City in 2004 with that dialogue removed entirely. It was the first time Rockstar had ever been made to go back and change a released game, and it wouldn't be the last. From the very beginning, San Andreas was built differently. It was obvious that Vice City hadn't innovated that much, and another reskin wasn't going to fly, in technical director Obi Vermai's own words. So this time they had 2 whole years of development, more than double what Vice City had received. And the difference would show. Instead of 1 city, this time they were going for 3. 1 based on Los Angeles, 1 based on San Francisco, and 1 based on Las Vegas. Although the original plan was actually 3 separate maps, connected only by trains and planes, similar to how the first GTA games worked. But in a meeting that Obi Vermai later said publicly he still has nightmares about, the room was apparently split. 3 people wanted separate maps, but 2 didn't. Obi went home that night genuinely convinced they were about to make a massive mistake. However, the next morning, Leslie Benzies walked back into the room with his mind made up. 1 map, 3 cities, all connected. And when Leslie Benzies had a strong opinion on something, that was just what they did. But building 3 cities across 1 enormous connected map on PS2 hardware was only half the challenge, because San Andreas wasn't just going to be bigger than anything Rockstar had built before, it was going to feel completely different to anything they'd ever made. San Andreas was set in early 90s LA when gang culture was at its peak. The crack epidemic was tearing communities apart, and the Rodney King riots had just set the city on fire. This was raw, and for a studio full of developers from Edinburgh, Scotland, they were going to need help from someone who actually knew this world, someone who lived it. Enter DJ Pooh, a legendary West Coast hip-hop producer who had co-written Friday alongside Ice Cube. DJ Pooh came on board as a creative consultant and co-writer. He took the team around Los Angeles himself, drove Scottish developers through South Central, through Compton, through the actual neighbourhoods that CJ's world was built on, showing them the blocks, the people, the gangs and the culture. For a group of developers from Edinburgh, it was like landing on another planet. Sam Houser later recalled being both fascinated yet terrified by what they encountered during that research. But DJ Pooh's contributions didn't stop there, because it was also Pooh who found the voice of CJ. Young Melee, a Los Angeles rapper and close friend of DJ Pooh's, didn't even know he was on Rockstar's radar. Pooh called him up for what seemed like a completely normal conversation about music. What Melee didn't know was that the call was on speakerphone and Rockstar were listening in the whole time. They heard his voice, his natural LA delivery, and liked what they heard enough to bring him in for a proper audition.
When he hung up, he called me back like 15 minutes later, and he was like, "Hey man, I was in the meeting with Rockstar Games, and I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want you to put too much on it or not enough. I wanted you to be Melee."
But when Melee actually pulled up to the studio on the day, there was a massive line wrapped around the building. Rockstar had cast a wide net, and every candidate was given the same thing to read: a scene from Menace to Society, specifically the iconic drive-through carjacking burger scene.
You know what I mean? So I'm on there doing my thing, and he said, "Dude, like, you know, you're really good. You had me like actually scared. You know, it's so authentic."
Rockstar liked him so much they called him in to read again a short while after the first audition, narrowed down the candidates some more, and eventually he got the final call from Rockstar asking if he could come to their headquarters in New York.
"Would you be, you know, able to come to New York in 2 weeks?" I said, "Hell yeah." Yeah, I mean, I'll start walking right now.
And when he arrived in New York and got into the recording booth, the scale of what he'd taken on became very real, very fast. Melee described the script as being thicker than 2 Bibles. Almost every line had to be recorded multiple times in different states of CJ's health. A thinner voice for when he was lean, and a heavier delivery for when he'd get bigger due to the brand new muscle and weight system. And just like DJ Pooh had done on the streets of LA, Melee made sure the dialogue came out as real as possible. He corrected slang throughout the script, making sure every line CJ delivered actually reflected how people spoke on the streets of early 90s Los Angeles. And despite all the headaches that came with Vice City's Hollywood cast, it had also proven that the right voices could elevate a game to something else entirely. So for San Andreas, they put together another that was seriously impressive. Fewer big names than Vice City, but the ones they got were perfectly placed. Samuel L. Jackson as corrupt cop Frank Tenpenny, the biggest villain of the game who became the most iconic antagonist of the entire franchise. Chris Penn as his ruthless partner Eddie Pulaski, Ice-T as rap mogul Mad Dog, Charlie Murphy as Jizzy B, David Cross as Zero, James Woods as the mysterious government agent Mike Torino, Peter Fonda as the Truth, an aging hippie conspiracy theorist who becomes one of CJ's most unlikely allies, and William Fichtner returning from Vice City as Ken Rosenberg. But unlike the chaotic sprint of Vice City, the production this time around was relatively smooth. Grand Theft Auto 3 was built by just 23 people, Vice City by a similarly small team under enormous pressure. But for San Andreas, Rockstar had grown significantly, bringing over the entire team from Manhunt after that game wrapped, swelling the development team to around 80 people by the time the game was released, the biggest Rockstar North had ever gotten up until that point. But while this expanded army of developers meant more hands on deck, Leslie Benzie's mandate for a single seamless map meant the programming team in Edinburgh was about to face a brutal battle with the PlayStation 2 hardware, a machine that was already 4 years old with just 32 megabytes of RAM to work with. GTA 3 was 8.12 kilometers squared, Vice City was 9.11 kilometers squared, but San Andreas was 38.2 kilometers squared, more than double the size of both previous games combined. And they were doing all of that on the exact same hardware those first 2 3D games were made on. While it was also rumoured both before and after release, and even till this day, that San Andreas used a dual-layer DVD disc capable of holding double the storage of a standard disc, they actually managed to cram the entire game onto a standard single-layer disc, coming in at around 4.5 gigabytes on PS2 and 4.7 gigabytes on PC. So, how did they actually pull it off? Well, firstly, the streaming system had to be completely rebuilt from the ground up and pushed beyond its limits. In GTA 3 and Vice City, the map was split into islands separated by long bridges and water channels. The engine relied on these pathways as choke points to artificially slow the player down, giving the PS2 enough time to load the next area. If you crossed those borders too quickly, the engine simply couldn't keep up, completely shattering your immersion with a sudden loading screen mid-drive. But for San Andreas, Rockstar redesigned the system to use a far more aggressive form of streaming because the map had to run as a seamless, singular, massive landmass. Instead of waiting for structural boundaries to clear memory, the new engine maintained a dynamic, high-speed bubble around the player. It constantly pulled in assets directly ahead of your path, while aggressively purging everything that slipped out of your radius the absolute second it was deemed no longer needed. While this real-time world streaming technique successfully eliminated mid-game loading screens altogether, stretching it across a map 4 times the size of Vice City meant playing a dangerous game with the console's limitations, and the cracks showed in ways players encountered daily, such as your jet exploding into a radio tower, tree, or a telephone pole that the game hadn't even rendered on screen yet. Basically, the game would load an object's collision, its physical presence in the world, before it had time to actually draw them on screen. They also had to deliberately add extra air resistance onto vehicles in certain parts of the map in order to slow players down, just to give the streaming system enough time to load the world ahead. And thanks to a fellow GTA YouTuber called TJGM who mapped every single hidden speed zone across the entire state, we can actually see where Rockstar put them. They're located in the most asset-heavy areas of the map where the engine was under the most strain, and in places where the player could build up enough speed to outrun the streaming system, such as freeways and bridges. However, despite all of the technical limitations, the magicians at Rockstar North did what they always did. They found a way, and delivered something that nobody in the industry was quite ready for. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas launched on October 26, 2004. The reviews were immediate and unanimous, with perfect scores across the board. It became the fastest best-selling PlayStation 2 game in history, and it went on to sell 17.3 million copies on the PS2 alone and 27.5 million across all platforms, making it not just the best-selling game of 2004, but the best-selling PlayStation 2 game of all time, a record it still holds to this day. But Rockstar's time in the limelight was about to turn into a nightmare. Barely 8 months after launch, a Dutch programmer dug into the game's code and uncovered a secret Rockstar thought they had safely locked away forever, and its discovery would trigger a mainstream media meltdown that nearly destroyed the entire company, becoming the biggest and most expensive controversy in Rockstar's history, and one of the most infamous in the gaming space as a whole.
How about a little coffee?
Alright, let's have us some coffee.
During development, Rockstar had built a very explicit mini-game into San Andreas, one where CJ could take a girlfriend home and the camera would cut inside, and an interactive sequence would play out that went far beyond anything considered acceptable in mainstream gaming. Late in development, the decision was made to pull it, but rather than removing the code entirely, Rockstar simply disabled and buried it, confident nobody would ever find it. However, on June 9th, 2005, just 2 days after San Andreas landed on PC, a Dutch modder named Patrick Wildenborg uploaded a single file to GTAgarage.com named Hot Coffee. The file size was tiny, only around 1.23 megabytes, since all the mod did was edit a tiny bit of code, basically like flipping a switch to unlock the content that was already in the game. Within days of the mod being uploaded, videos began circulating around the internet, and from there it didn't take long to reach the mainstream news. And when it did, the reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Jack Thompson, who had spent years trying to burn Rockstar to the ground, finally had the ammunition he'd been looking for. He went on every network that would have him, calling it proof of a deliberate conspiracy to expose children to corn. And infamously, Hillary Clinton, then a US senator, grabbed the political spotlight. She officially petitioned the FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, to investigate whether Rockstar Games had deceived the public and violated rating disclosures, while also demanding new laws to regulate video games and protect the American youth from what she called a silent epidemic. Rockstar's initial response only made things worse, releasing a statement blaming hackers and modders for creating the explicit content themselves. But that defense instantly crumbled. Since the mod was only 1 megabyte, it proved the massive graphic files and animations were already sitting on millions of retail discs worldwide. Within weeks, Hillary Clinton successfully pressured the Entertainment Software Rating Board to change the game's rating from M for mature to AO for adults only. And in the retail world, an adults only rating was the kiss of death. Major retail giants like Walmart, Target and Best Buy were forced to pull the game from their shelves, and Rockstar had no choice but to immediately halt production, recall millions of copies and patch out the hidden code in order to get it back on store shelves. The financial damage was astronomical. Rockstar's parent company, Take-Two Interactive, lost over $20 million in recalled inventory and legal fees, and they eventually had to settle a class action lawsuit from angry consumers for another $20 million. Even worse, Hillary Clinton's petition successfully forced the FTC into action, hitting the company with a federal investigation that put their business practices under a microscope for years. The wild, untamed era of Rockstar Games being an untouchable industry rebel was effectively over, forcing the company into an era of strict corporate secrecy. But with the wounds from one of the biggest scandals in gaming history still fresh, the team at Rockstar North found themselves facing a completely new challenge. The PlayStation 2 era was drawing to a close, and a new generation of hardware was arriving with the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Rockstar had always been about pushing the boundaries and redefining what a video game could be, and this time around would be no different, because what was coming next would shake the industry all over again, and nobody saw it coming. Production on Grand Theft Auto 4 began roughly a month after San Andreas was released. Rockstar knew immediately the series needed to transition into the high-definition era, and committed to transitioning GTA into the HD universe from day one. But first they had a problem to solve. For the PS2 era games, Rockstar had been using a third-party engine called Renderware, developed by a company called Criterion Games. However, in 2004, EA acquired Criterion, and overnight the engine powering Rockstar's biggest franchise now belonged to a direct competitor. For Rockstar, that was unacceptable. Grand Theft Auto was now a household name, and they had no intentions of building the future of the franchise on an engine they didn't own. So they abandoned renderware and turned their focus toward developing their own technologies, all of which led to the creation of the Rockstar Advanced Game Engine, or RAGE, developed by Rockstar San Diego, the engine that would go on to become not just the backbone for Grand Theft Auto moving forward, but every major game Rockstar released from that point forward. However, building a brand new engine from scratch was a pretty large risk to take with your studio's biggest franchise on the line. Rockstar needed a safe way to essentially stress test their new tech before building a massive next-generation digital metropolis. Their solution was unexpected to say the least. A ping-pong simulator called Rockstar Games Presents Table Tennis, released in 2006. While it seemed like an odd detour for the creators of Grand Theft Auto, this simple title was actually a strategic Trojan horse. Developed by Rockstar San Diego, it served as the live testbed to prove their new proprietary engine, RAGE, on next-generation hardware. It gave engineers a low-stakes environment to work out the core systems RAGE needed to actually work. Physics, lighting, the surface rendering, a chance to find and fix problems before scaling any of it up to a massive open world, one that would end up being the most detailed and technically complex thing Rockstar had ever attempted. The RAGE engine gave Rockstar the ability to build a world with a level of simulation that had never been possible before. And alongside it, Rockstar integrated a second piece of technology that would define the entire physical feel of the HD era, Natural Motion's Euphoria engine. The previous games had these stiff, baked-in animations, pre-recorded movements that played out identically every single time. Euphoria destroyed that limitation by doing something that quite frankly seemed impossible at the time. Instead of playing back pre-recorded animations for how a character reacts physically, it generated those reactions live on the spot using a mix of artificial intelligence, biomechanics, and real-time physics. Because all of this ran through the CPU in real time, no two physical reactions played out the same way. Every reaction to a bullet impact or a moving vehicle produced a reaction that was unique. Characters had what Natural Motion called Euphoria behaviors. An advanced dynamic balancer gave them natural balance under adverse conditions, meaning a character stumbling on uneven ground would instinctively adjust their footing rather than snapping to a preset animation. And working alongside the RAGE engine, Euphoria gave the NPCs an underlying sense of self-preservation that really made them feel alive in a way no game had ever done before. But taking this from a controlled demo to an actual living open world was, as you can imagine, no walk in the park. In fact, when Sam Houser first showed interest in using Euphoria in the game, he was told it would be technically impossible. They advised it to be restricted to unplayable cutscenes or scripted sequences, such as a character falling down a flight of stairs. However, Rockstar refused to accept a limited version of the tech. Engineers from Natural Motion relocated to Edinburgh and worked on-site at Rockstar North for several months at a time, rewriting code to weave Euphoria directly into RAGE's real-time physics thread until it worked, resulting in a major engineering triumph for the game. To match the physical realism provided by RAGE and Euphoria, Rockstar wanted a world that felt grounded, gritty, and alive. And what better place than the concrete jungle, New York City? So they decided to return to the setting that started it all in the 3D era, Liberty City, rebuilding it from the ground up entirely. The goal wasn't just to recreate New York's physical layout, but to capture its soul, the claustrophobia of the streets, the griminess, the noise that never stops. So in March 2005, a 60 to 70 person research crew from Rockstar North flew out to New York, spending nearly 2 weeks going boots on the ground across all 5 boroughs: Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and yes, even Staten Island. The mission was spearheaded by art director Aaron Garbett, who directed his team of artists and sound engineers to look past the pristine, touristy postcard stuff, and instead he ordered them to focus on the mundane reality of the urban landscape, like the architectural clutter, trash build-up, public bathrooms, and alleyways. Rockstar even arranged for retired NYPD officers who had previously worked the beat in Washington Heights to personally drive the team around the neighborhood, giving them a real, unfiltered, street-level view of the city. Armed with high-end digital cameras, camcorders, and audio recorders, the team fanned out across the city to capture the raw, unfiltered data needed to transition the franchise into the HD era. They studied every layer of street detail imaginable. To put it into perspective, the combined research effort had produced well over 100,000 reference photographs and several hundred hours of raw video footage. Back at Rockstar North in Edinburgh, these recordings were played on a constant loop throughout the studio on large monitors, soaking the mid-2000s New York atmosphere into the team's daily workflow environment to keep the tone as consistent as possible and ensure a Liberty City that felt totally authentic. Rockstar even hired a full-time research team permanently based in New York to handle ongoing requests such as the ethnic makeup of a specific neighborhood, traffic patterns at particular intersections, or the exact architecture of a specific subway entrance. And the team didn't just stop at New York, they crossed the border into New Jersey, thoroughly documenting the industrial landscapes, dense suburban neighborhoods, and the gritty streets of Jersey City. In the final game, this area became Alderney, a completely separate in-game state that actually absorbed some repurposed assets from Staten Island, the only one out of the 5 New York boroughs that failed to make the final cut. These wireframe shots, released inconspicuously by Andrew Sousay, a former environment artist at Rockstar North, show a block that is modelled directly after 577 Bay Street in Staten Island. In the final game, the only change to this block was the Paramount Theatre, which was swapped out for a cinema modelled after the Tenafly Cinema in Jersey. Looking at Rockstar's earliest concept sketches, originally the map would have featured the entire tri-state area, with different terrains like San Andreas, stretching from the mountains of upstate New York all the way down to the Hamptons in Long Island. The Hamptons technically exists as a location within the game's universe, referenced on the radio under the name the Caraways. But as development progressed, the tri-state concept quickly collided with the harsh realities of the technical limitations of the hardware at the time. If Rockstar kept the map that large, the game's overall quality would have taken a major hit. So they scaled it back, keeping it to just Liberty City and Alderney, allowing them to pour all of their resources into making those environments as dense, alive, and visually uncompromising as possible. With the world built, Rockstar now had to come up with a protagonist worthy of it, and in a recent interview on the Lex Fridman podcast, his first major public appearance since leaving Rockstar, Dan Houser finally opened up about how Niko Bellic came to life for the very first time. It began with a single sentence: a Serbian immigrant in America. From there, Dan and his team spent nearly a year building that idea outward from every angle. What this person would die for, what broke them, what made them laugh. But what really separated Niko from every GTA protagonist before him was how personal and human he felt. Dan described GTA 4 as an attempt to capture an immigrant experience, someone both enchanted and alienated by America, because Dan himself was living that. A British immigrant in New York, single, miserable, and unsure whether he even wanted to stay in America while writing the game. Years later, he wondered to himself why the game was so dark and realised that was why. It was 2 moments early in the writing that told his instincts this character was working, even though it was taking a huge risk. The comedic scene of Niko discovering his cousin's glamorous promises were a delusion, and a darker moment where Niko opens up about his wartime past. Comedy and tragedy side by side. That combination gave Dan the confidence Niko could carry the whole game, and in retrospect he wasn't wrong, was he? To bring Niko to life, Rockstar turned to a Russian actor named Vladimir Mashkov, whose character Sasha Ivanich in the 2001 film Behind Enemy Lines had been the direct visual inspiration for Niko from the very beginning. Rockstar approached Mashkov about voicing the character, however he turned it down. In 2006, video game voice acting still wasn't considered serious work, especially by actors who'd already landed leading roles in major Hollywood blockbusters. So the role ended up going to a Broadway performer named Michael Hollick, who'd most notably made several minor guest appearances across the Law & Order TV show. Hollick actually landed the voice acting role of Niko Bellic by accident after initially being hired only to perform the physical motion capture work.
I initially was hired to do the motion capture.
I didn't know that.
So I did all the motion capture for the character as well.
For the first 2 weeks on set, Hollick performed without knowing the game's true identity, as Rockstar developed the project under the strict codename Frozen to prevent leaks. To help himself fully embody the character he was performing on the mocap stage, he began using an Eastern European accent as a physical acting tool. And as the sessions progressed, Hollick began naturally inhabiting the character. The Serbian accent, the body language, the emotional weight. It was all there. Motion capture director Rod Edge, who serves as the Senior Vice President of Performance Production at Rockstar to this day, realised this and decided that Hollick actually fit the character all round perfectly. So 2 weeks into production, Rockstar officially asked Michael Hollick to take on the voice acting role as well as the mocap. But since Michael Hollick is from Brooklyn, New York himself, Rockstar brought in a dialect coach to work with him throughout production. Here is the only surviving photo we have from all of the shoots, which was actually taken during motion capture for the opening cutscene scene during the mission Escuela of the Streets. On the far left, you can see the background dancers from the scene. Then we have Michael Hollick and Berto Colon, aka Nico and Manny, right in the centre of the shot, and then Daniel O'Brien, aka Jay Hamilton, the cameraman on the right side, being directed by Rod Edge. And over the course of those 15 months, what Michael Hollick delivered became the beating heart of the entire game.
Remember, during the war, we did some bad things, and bad things happened to us. War is where the young and stupid are tricked by the old and bitter into killing each other. I was very young and very angry. Maybe that is no excuse.
A performance so utterly convincing and so deeply felt that it would go on to win him Best Male Voice Actor at the 2008 Video Game Awards. But Hollick's supporting cast were extraordinary in their own right. Unlike the 3D era games, this time around there were no name Hollywood actors or recognisable faces in the game. Every single actor in GTA 4 was completely unknown, at least until the game was released, and the performances they delivered spoke for themselves. Character after character, each one unforgettable, proving Rockstar's theory that hiring unknown actors gave the performances a far more authentic and believable quality, an approach to casting they haven't abandoned since. And while the game was still being built behind Rockstar's now impenetrable walls, they chose to announce GTA 4 at Microsoft's E3 press conference on May 9th, 2006, still just under 2 years out from release, and it became one of the most iconic E3 moments of all time. Peter Moore, then corporate vice president of Microsoft's interactive entertainment business, famously announced GTA 4 for Xbox 360 by rolling up his sleeve to reveal a freshly done tattoo of the game's logo. Less than a year after this legendary reveal, the first trailer for the game was released on March 29th, 2007, titled Things Will Be Different, just over a minute long.
Perhaps here, things will be different.
It was the first time the world had ever seen Grand Theft Auto in high definition, and for anyone who'd grown up with the PS2 era games, it was a jaw-dropping moment. It was overwhelmingly well received, generating massive hype. GTA 4 was originally scheduled to launch in October 2007. However, the game was pushed back by 6 months to April 2008, with Rockstar citing the need for additional development time to ensure the game met the standard they were holding themselves to across both the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, a delay that, as any Rockstar fan will tell you, would become something of a tradition. Grand Theft Auto 4 launched on April 29th, 2008. In its first 24 hours alone, the game generated $310 million in sales. By the end of its first week, that number had climbed to $500 million, shattering Halo 3's record as the fastest selling entertainment product in history. Not just the fastest selling game, the fastest selling entertainment product, period, which includes film, music, television, everything. Nothing had ever made that much money that fast. It broke 3 separate Guinness World Records on launch and scored a 98 out of 100 on Metacritic, making it the second highest rated game ever recorded on the platform at the time. And remember the problems Hillary Clinton caused for Rockstar due to the hot coffee drama? Well, players quickly noticed they hadn't forgotten. Sitting in the middle of Happiness Island, in clear parody of the Statue of Liberty, stood the Statue of Happiness, with the face bearing an uncanny resemblance to Hillary Clinton herself. And in her raised hand, instead of a torch, was a steaming cup of coffee. Rockstar also carved a satirical message into the tablet in her other hand, taking a jab at American politics. And with that, GTA 4 took its place as something more than a game. It showed this medium could be as raw, as human, and as emotionally devastating as anything Hollywood had ever produced. Sam and Dan Houser had always believed that themselves, and now they'd proven it without a shadow of a doubt. This title truly became the benchmark every open-world game would be measured against, and still to this day, nearly 2 decades later, it's still one of the greatest games ever created. A game so ahead of its time that titles releasing right now are still struggling to match what Rockstar built back in 2008. The development period between Grand Theft Auto 4 and 5 was a defining era for Rockstar Games. Before GTA 5, the company's studios largely operated as separate creative kingdoms. Rockstar North autonomously handled GTA, while San Diego spearheaded Red Dead Redemption. But as the gaming industry hurtled deeper into the HD era, the old ways crumbled. The level of detail and sheer scale of the games they envisioned for the franchise moving forward was something Rockstar North could no longer handle mainly on its own. For GTA GTA 5, they weren't content with just a larger map and varied terrain. They envisioned a world built around 3 distinct, switchable protagonists, an audacious mechanic they had actually conceptualized all the way back during San Andreas, but lacked the technology to execute. The only way to survive this level of ambition was to fundamentally restructure. For the first time in the company's history, the walls between its international branches were torn down to fully unite multiple teams under a single massive project. The numbers alone illustrated this seismic shift, where Grand Theft Auto 4 was built by a core team of roughly 200 developers at Rockstar North in Edinburgh. GTA 5 would demand a global army of over 1,000. Preliminary work on Grand Theft Auto 5 began almost immediately after GTA 4 shipped. At this stage, it was a skeleton crew, a tiny group quietly laying the conceptual groundwork while the rest of the studio caught their breath from the most successful launch in entertainment history. And from the very beginning, the setting was never really in question. Dan Houser later confirmed that Sam and Aaron Garbett were both fixated on the idea of doing a proper Los Angeles, something San Andreas had only sketched out at a small scale. This time, they wanted it to feel like the real thing. And so, Los Santos it was. Fast forward to April 2009, and the earliest documented build of GTA 5 was created. A file named builds.xml was accidentally left on the retail disc of the original Xbox 360 and PS3 versions of the game, which modders extracted. Inside the file is the entire build history of GTA 5's development. Every internal version Rockstar compiled, time-stamped, logged, and even annotated with the developer's own notes on bugs and fixes, right up until the final submission build in August 2013, a month out from the game's release. The first entry dates all the way back to April 20th, 2009, labelled Initial Version, and then nothing. The log goes completely cold for over a year until May 2010, when the build entries suddenly resume almost daily. The exact same month Red Dead Redemption 1 shipped, and every resource Rockstar had was finally free to point at one place. It was around this time the white box map blueprint, which the skeleton crew had spent that silent year building, was finally completed. An untextured 3D sculpture mapping out the fundamental landmarks, road layouts, and districts of Los Santos, which was accomplished by scouring Google and virtual Street View scouting. So with the white box blueprint completed, the first research teams were dispatched to Los Angeles in July 2010, spending over 100 days embedded in the city, working alongside architectural historians and specialized tour guides who helped the art team understand the specific design eras, structural shapes, and history of iconic LA buildings so they could be accurately parodied in Los Santos. And similarly, like they had done for GTA 4 in New York, Rockstar hired off-duty LAPD officers to drive the team around the city, giving developers first-hand insight into local gang territories, under-the-radar crime dynamics, and the unfiltered reality of different neighborhoods. Rockstar also brought back a familiar face, DJ Pooh, the legendary West Coast producer who had been instrumental in making San Andreas feel as authentic as it did, returned once again acting as a crucial cultural consultant. His job was to bridge the gap between Rockstar's development teams and the real-world West Coast street culture of the present day, a world completely changed from the early 90s Los Santos he had originally helped Rockstar build just under a decade earlier. And in an incredible full-circle twist that nobody could have predicted, DJ Pooh would end up shaping the franchise's legacy for a second time, reaching out to one of his close friends, Sean Fontino, to audition for the role of Franklin, who just happened to be the real-life, blood-related cousin of young Melee, the voice of CJ.
I got young Melee, man. Y'all know who young Melee is, man. The world know who this motherfucker is, man. It's the nigga, man. Tell him who you is. CJ from San Andreas. What's up, y'all?
What's up? What's up, CJ?
Live and direct. CJ and Franklin up in this motherfucking real life shit, though.
But the research didn't stop at Los Angeles, as GTA 5 wasn't just going to be a city, it was going to be an entire state based off of multiple parts of Southern California. So the teams travelled far beyond the city limits as well to capture the distinct, contrasting regions that would form the world around it. But back at Rockstar North in Edinburgh, this mountain of real-world data immediately ran into a technological wall. The Rage engine framework left over from GTA 4 was completely unequipped to handle the sprawling, uninterrupted, horizontal scale of San Andreas that Rockstar were going for this time around. One of the most immediate problems was the draw distance. In GTA 4, Liberty City effectively went dark beyond a certain range, with the city's lights simply ceasing to exist past an invisible boundary. It became such a known limitation that a very popular mod called Project 2DFX existed specifically to fix it on the PC version, artificially extending how far the game would draw the lights of Liberty City. While the previous games had always used 2D light sprites to create the illusion of a glowing bulb, those sprites were strictly tied to the physical 3D lampposts and buildings loaded immediately around the player. If the distant buildings and lampposts didn't load, the glowing light sprites didn't load either. What Rockstar did for GTA 5 was sever that dependency entirely. The light sprites were decoupled from the physical world objects and given their own independent rendering system, one that could stream and display thousands of light sources across the map, regardless of whether the underlying 3D buildings and lampposts had actually loaded in, even including moving car headlights along distant highways. Beyond the city lights, the engine's general render distance was dramatically extended, and it needed to be. Aaron Garbett himself confirmed that the map's large enough to fit the worlds of San Andreas, GTA 4, and Red Dead Redemption 1 inside of it all at once. And that scale had a consequence GTA fans had been anticipating. Fixed-wing aircraft were back. Rockstar quietly removed planes from GTA 4 because Liberty City simply wasn't large enough to justify them, but of course going back to San Andreas it made total sense. The static weather presets from the previous game were also replaced with a fluid, dynamic system. Instead of abruptly snapping between conditions, weather now transitioned a lot more organically, with clouds building and dispersing and the sky shifting gradually from one state to the next, making the day and night cycle feel far more immersive. But accommodating all of the graphical enhancements and a world of this scale on what was now 7-year-old console hardware demanded a trade-off. GTA 5 used the same natural motion euphoria physics engine as GTA 4, but its parameters had to be toned down significantly, resulting in noticeably less reactive and dynamic character physics that players had experienced and fell in love with in Liberty City. By March 2011, the build log shows the game had climbed from version 18 when the research teams first touched down in LA to version 70. Along the way, the basics were slowly coming together. Multiplayer was confirmed loading in, and the wanted level system, still broken in places, was being chipped away at, meaning at this stage of development, much of the map, roads, police AI, and navigation already existed in some playable form, even if it was still far from finished. And it was that very same month, March 2011, that the first major crack in Rockstar's secrecy regarding their new Grand Theft Auto title appeared publicly. A casting call surfaced online for an interactive project titled Rush, posted by Telsey and Company, Rockstar's go-to casting studio. Rush was one of GTA 5's earliest aliases to prevent leaks. Not even the future protagonists themselves had any idea they were auditioning for the next entry in the globally celebrated Grand Theft Auto series. The casting call post immediately sparked speculation that it was secretly GTA 5, all because of the over-the-top character descriptions. There was Kevin De Silva, a fat pot-smoking FPS gamer son with anxiety issues who enjoys trash-talking while playing online. Mitch Hayes, an annoying, wise-cracking, highly successful FBI agent in great shape, but still has a sense of humour. Nervous Jerry, a paranoid reclusive living out in the sticks. And Harut Vartanyan, an Armenian car dealer heavily connected to the underworld, but irritates people so much no one likes him. Around this time, fans were also uncovering more hints of what Rockstar was building behind the scenes. The studio had quietly registered a handful of oddly specific web domains, each one carrying that lyrical GTA tone. The biggest being lifeinvader.com, which would later become the actual in-game Facebook parody in GTA 5. In the months that followed from all the speculation, Rockstar stayed completely silent. While behind closed doors, the game was edging closer to the point where it could finally be revealed. Michael, Franklin, and Trevor's character models all entered the build log within about 5 weeks of each other between June 1st and July 7th, 2011. We also have some screenshots here pulled from a Rockstar developer's portfolio of how the game looked around this point in time. As you can see, the radar's still a circle like GTA 4, but the bars are already split into 3 sections. One for health, one for armor, and one for the protagonist's special abilities. While the map clearly wasn't anywhere close to being 100% complete, it was far along enough to reveal. So it was right about here in the summer of 2011, Rockstar began working on GTA 5's first trailer, completely unbeknownst to the world, as on October 25th, 2011, a few months later, Rockstar finally finally broke its silence in the simplest way possible. A single tweet reading #GTAV, linking to a page on their website that displayed nothing but the game's logo, and a live countdown clock ticking down to the date of a first trailer. And the internet went crazy. This was the first confirmation from Rockstar themselves that GTA 5 actually existed, and a week later, on November 2nd, the first trailer arrived.
Why did I move here? I guess it was the weather. Or I don't know, that thing, that magic.
The build log shows that on that exact same day, the game sat at version 150, with bugs being tracked on yoga and streaming issues like the game stuttering when driving at speed, along with some multiplayer-specific issues such as reload animation for pump shotgun loops on remote players' screen. And from the first trailer itself, it's evident the map was still a work in progress. Barely anyone noticed at the time, but in the scene of Michael flying past the camera in an obey, you can actually see huge chunks of the map are completely missing when slowing the footage down or pausing it. The trailer may have been the world's first look, but the game itself still had 2 more years of work ahead of it. One of the most significant changes happened a few months later on February 2nd, 2012, when the circular radar was changed for the first time in the series to the new square 3D minimap. Throughout the first half of 2012, the build log paints a picture of the game steadily coming together. The weapon wheel, a brand new addition to the GTA series, first appears in the build log in March 2012, described as weapon selection wheel is now active. By this stage, all of the foundational systems were pretty much in place, and 3 weeks later, updated lighting shaders were added, a sign that the game was entering a stage of visual polish. Months of quiet progress led to July 12th, 2012, when Rockstar released its first official screenshots of GTA 5. A police maverick soaring over downtown Los Santos, and this shot of Mirror Park, which has these gorgeous pink trees which didn't actually make it to the final game. In fact, comparing some of the development screenshots we have of the game to what we got on release, you can tell a lot of vegetation simply never made it in. Both the PS3 and Xbox 360 were working with just 512 megabytes of total RAM, a fraction of what a modern PC has today. The hardware simply lacked the memory to handle the sheer amount of trees, bushes, and high-density grass present in these early builds, and much of it had to be stripped back to avoid tanking performance or crashing the systems. Rockstar would go on to release 10 more screenshots the following month in August, and the hype only kept building from there. Shortly after, on October 30th, 2012, Rockstar felt confident enough to finally commit to a release date and dropped the bombshell. GTA 5 was officially coming worldwide in spring 2013, with pre-orders dropping the following week, essentially doubling down on that window. Hence, the build log tells a slightly different story. Around this exact period, the recurring note "memory is low" appears again and again, build after build, almost certainly forcing the team to keep cutting back vegetation and interiors just to keep the game running. But it wasn't just memory issues. The game's own prologue, the literal first mission every player would experience, had a handful of bugs that completely broke it outright. For example, Michael wouldn't get into the driver's seat, and Trevor was being killed before gameplay could be handed back to the player during the car chase. Core gameplay mechanics were also causing major issues. Stealth mode, for instance, would stop working the moment the player fired a weapon, a bug that persisted for weeks across multiple builds. With bugs this significant, were Rockstar really going to make that spring window coming up within the next 3 months? The answer, of course, was no. Rockstar gave the news fans had been dreading. GTA 5 would miss its spring window entirely, being pushed back months beyond its original release date, their reasoning being that the game simply needs a little more polish to be of the standard both they and the fans held them to. Sound familiar? However, it was a delay that was very much needed, allowing Rockstar to smooth over and polish the rough edges that had threatened the spring release. In March 2013, Rockstar began revealing the cover art in one of the coolest ways possible, by secretly having it painted piece by piece onto the side of a building on 7th Avenue in Manhattan. For quite a while, nobody even realised what was being painted, or knew it was actually an official Rockstar stunt. However, the mural even included the game's rating pending ESRB logo, making it look almost too official to be fan art, and people were catching on. But Rockstar confirmed it themselves the very next day the mural was finished, releasing the finished digital cover art for the world to see. It was around this time in early 2013 that the build log began referring to multiplayer by its new name, GTA Online. What had once been planned as something closer to an expansion on GTA 4's online mode was, by this point, clearly something far bigger. The game was entering its final stretch, with the very last entry in the build log landing on August 11th, 2013, just over a month out from from the game's release date. Just weeks before launch, Rockstar teamed up with West Coast Customs, the famous auto body shop behind those one-of-a-kind cars, on Pimp My Ride to take their marketing to a whole nother level. Together, they forged a real-life, fully street-legal version of the series' most iconic sports car, the Bravado Banshee. Rockstar dumped over $200,000 into the car, built from a 2006 Dodge Viper SRT, with every single detail custom-shaped to flawlessly match the in-game model right down to the badges. It was first teased on Rockstar's Newswire on August 22nd, before the finished car was fully revealed just under 2 weeks later, then given away through a GameStop pre-order sweepstakes. The winner was a 56-year-old woman from North Carolina named Sherry Parker, who later sold the car to help pay for her son's college tuition. Grand Theft Auto 5 was launched on September 17th, 2013, after 5 years of development and a script that had grown past 3,500 pages, more than triple the amount of its predecessor. Within its first 24 hours, the game generated $800 million in sales, moving roughly 11 million units. By the third day, it surpassed $1 billion in revenue, shattering global records to become the fastest-selling entertainment product in history at the time. But while the public broke sales records, the game was entering its post-launch transition phase. The plan, originally, was simple: repeat what worked for GTA 4. So behind the scenes, writers and designers were already hard at work on massive single-player story expansions, including a zombie apocalypse mode, an alien invasion, and a James Bond-style spy thriller codenamed Agent Trevor, confirmed by Dan Houser himself to be about half finished when Rockstar pulled the plug. You see, after Rockstar turned the key on GTA Online a couple of weeks after launch, their priorities shifted fast. Everything changed with the introduction of shark cards, which let players buy in-game cash with real money, and the numbers crushed any projection story DLC could touch, so they were quietly shelved. None of this information would surface publicly for almost a decade, only coming to light years later through data leaks. However, the unfathomable success of GTA Online coincided with an internal earthquake that shattered the studio's leadership structure. Just a year after launch, in September 2014, Rockstar North's legendary president and the lead producer behind the Grand Theft Auto franchise, Leslie Benzies, went on a company sabbatical. However, when he attempted to come back to work at the brand new Edinburgh office in early 2015, he discovered his keycard had been completely deactivated and security ordered him off the premises. The fallout was catastrophic. By 2016, Leslie had launched a huge $150 million lawsuit against Take-Two and the Houser brothers for unpaid royalties. The unsealed court documents pulled back the curtain on a bitter civil war brewing right under the surface of GTA 5's massive success. Leslie Benzies claimed he was intentionally pushed out through a lengthy deception, alleging that Sam Houser's resentment had peaked when Leslie placed his own name last in the GTA Online credits, a premium spot traditionally reserved for Sam Houser himself. But Rockstar fired back, dismissing the claims as bizarre and citing performance and conduct issues as the reasons for his forced exit from the company. One of the masterminds behind Grand Theft Auto was now gone, leaving Rockstar North completely altered just as GTA Online was morphing into an unstoppable billion-dollar juggernaut. To fill the massive void left by Leslie Benzies, Rockstar turned inward, promoting two senior creatives to jointly run the Rockstar North Edinburgh office, art director Aaron Garbett and animation director Rob Nelson. Having personally shaped the visual layout of every single 3D open world the company had ever built since 1996, Aaron Garbett was an absolute institution at Rockstar North. Rob Nelson, on the other hand, was a veteran from Rockstar's Toronto branch who had massively stepped up and proved himself during the development of GTA 5. But unfortunately, there was another set of shoes waiting to be dropped. Shoes that absolutely no one in the gaming industry could ever fill. In early 2020, Rockstar's parent company Take-Two Interactive dropped a massive bombshell on the industry. Dan Houser, co-founder, vice president of creative, and the lead writer responsible for the script of every single major game Rockstar had ever released, officially walked away from the company. For over 2 decades, Dan Houser was the voice of Rockstar. He was the chief architect behind the cynical, satirical humor that defined the franchise.
Welcome to America.
But behind the scenes, his vision and the company's were drifting further apart. Dan was a purist for single-player storytelling. He was the guy who had pushed hardest for the GTA 5 story expansions before they were scrapped for live service updates. As GTA Online continued to to grow into a multi-billion-dollar cash cow, the corporate push for microtransactions and recurring revenue increasingly clashed with his creative vision. When his exit was officially finalized in March 2020, it marked the true end of an era. Two of the core architects of Grand Theft Auto were now unexpectedly out of the picture, leaving Sam Houser to steer a fragmented, multi-studio empire into the unmapped territory of GTA 6. In October 2013, just weeks after GTA 5 launched, Rockstar North president at the time Leslie Benzies gave an interview to Develop magazine. And when he was asked directly whether a GTA 6 was even on the table yet, he didn't dodge the question, revealing, "We've got about 45 years worth of ideas we want to do. We don't know what GTA 6 will be, but we've got some ideas." It was the first time anyone at Rockstar had acknowledged, even loosely, that a sixth game was on their mind. And yet, actual preliminary concept work on Grand Theft Auto 6 wouldn't begin for at least another year, with real pre-production not starting until late 2018, following the release of Red Dead Redemption 2. Initially, GTA 6 went under the codename Project Americas, and from that name alone, you can probably guess how ambitious the early scope of this game actually was. The very first GTA 6 leak surfaced in March 2018 through a news channel called Inside Gaming, which was formerly The Know, who correctly identified the game's internal development codename as Project Americas and claimed that the game would be set primarily in Vice City, Rockstar's version of Miami, with the map stretching out to its neighboring regions like South and Central America. At the time, it was just another unconfirmed rumor in a sea of them. Everybody took it with a grain of salt, but behind the scenes, Rockstar was actually furious about this information getting out, especially this early. In an interview that later came out with Brian Garr, the writer of that Inside Gaming episode, he revealed what happened shortly after that video went live.
They had inside info as to what it was looking like at the time. And it was like, it was codename Project Americas, and you're going to be doing drug missions to, and from the US to Central South America and all this. Got the person to confirm who they were, typed up the script, we put out the video, and no one believed us at the time, or it was kind of, the audience was kind of like, I don't know, you're full, kind of like you're full of shit or whatever. Rockstar flipped out.
Oh, wow.
They locked down the studio to find the leaker. And a vice president of Rockstar called me and was like, he's very nice, but he wanted to know, who my source was. And I was like, look, I was like, look, man, I cannot.
But soon enough, in the years to come, the leaked details regarding GTA 6 would be validated to the public 3 times over, one of them in the worst way possible for Rockstar. The first came just a year later. In October 2019, a letter from a professional location manager / scout working on behalf of Take-Two was posted on Reddit by a user named Fresh. The letter detailed a research trip scheduled for that same month, a team of 4 to 6 people, mainly interested in scouting interior spaces, with Rockstar willing to pay property owners an access fee to photograph and study the spaces. The scout team's mission was to tour and photograph various interesting locations throughout the state of Florida, stating that the research they gather will become part of the company's research library and will be used to inspire Rockstar's developers to build environments in their games that reflect real-life environments. Rockstar respects intellectual property rights and will not recreate protected artwork / sculptures, use employee or customer likenesses, or recreate business interiors without an owner's express written permission to do so. A well-known Rockstar leaker, who the studio had personally asked to stop leaking because his information kept turning out to be accurate, publicly vouched for the letter, confirming the scouting trip was real. Though, after this leak, the GTA 6 trail went cold for years, until Rockstar tweeted this in 2022, letting the world know that active development for the next entry in the series was underway. It wasn't much, but after nearly a decade of speculation, even that felt massive. Then, that same year, on July 27th, 2022, Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, a respected American journalist who primarily covers the video game industry, confirmed that the original leak from Inside Gaming was largely accurate. Rockstar's early plans for the game called for the inclusion of territories modelled after large parts of North and South America, hence why the project had been codenamed Americas in the first place. By this point, though, Rockstar had already reeled in those ambitions, cutting the map down to just Miami Miami and its surrounding areas. The report also revealed something else entirely that would be groundbreaking news for GTA fans, stating that Grand Theft Auto 6 would include a playable female protagonist for the first time in the series, and even more specifically a Latina woman paired as one of two leading characters in a story inspired by the infamous bank-robbing duo Bonnie and Clyde. Then, just 2 months later, on September 18th, 2022, everything got blown wide open, and in the most unbelievable way possible. A user on GTA forums going by the name Teapot Uber Hacker posted 90 real videos of GTA 6 in early development, straight from Rockstar's internal Slack workspace, using login credentials he'd stolen that belonged to a Rockstar employee. Arian Kurtaj, an 18-year-old British hacker from Oxford and a member of the hacking group Lapsus, the same group responsible for breaches at Uber, Microsoft, Nvidia, and even more gigantic companies, was out on bail awaiting sentencing for those previous attacks, staying in a hotel under police supervision with his laptop already confiscated. And yet, using nothing but a hotel TV, an Amazon Fire Stick, and a smartphone, he managed to hack one of the most secretive studios on the planet. Once inside the Rockstar employee's Slack messenger, he found links to the company's internal development servers and downloaded everything he could get his hands on. Around 50 minutes of raw footage of GTA 6 in development nobody outside Rockstar was ever supposed to see. And not only that, but the entire source code of GTA 5. The source code is essentially the actual underlying blueprint of a game. Every line of programming that tells the game how to run, how physics behave, how the AI thinks, how everything actually works under the hood. It's one of the things that, as a company that makes games, you guard more than anything else. Because in the wrong hands, it can be copied, picked apart, or used to build unauthorized mods or even entire competing games. With all of that now sitting in his hands, Arian messaged Rockstar directly, threatening to leak everything he had unless someone from the company got in touch with him within 24 hours. And when he didn't get a response within that time frame, he followed through, posting 90 clips of in-development GTA 6 footage for the entire world to see. And the amount of details those 90 clips revealed was almost hard to process. To name just a few things, 11 plus characters were leaked, 20 items and tools that would be in the game, 16 weapons, 8 activities, a ton of names of businesses and brands, over 50 new features and gameplay mechanics, 100 plus cars, and 300 to 400 interesting random world events. The world got its first ever look at GTA 6, but in a way Rockstar never intended. The following morning, less than 24 hours after the footage surfaced, Rockstar issued an official statement confirming the leaks were real and that they were extremely disappointed to have any details of their next game shared with players in this manner. The leaks cost Rockstar Games $5 million in recovery expenses and countless hours of staff time, but overall it had no significant impact on the game's development schedule or Take-Two's financial standing. But for a studio this obsessed with secrecy, Rockstar had an odd blind spot: its own legal paperwork. Starting in October 2023, nearly a dozen patent filings have been traced back to Take-Two Interactive, Rockstar's parent company. Fully public legal records uncovered by fans simply digging through government patent databases, pointing toward GTA 6 featuring revolutionary leaps in AI, character animations, and multiplayer infrastructure. One patent completely reworks how NPCs and traffic navigate the world, replacing the old scripted pathing with AI that reacts to what's actually happening around it: traffic, weather, the specific situation, rather than mindlessly following invisible train tracks. Another describes characters physically assembling their own movement in real time, out of smaller modular blocks based on injury, fatigue, terrain, and weather, instead of just playing back a pre-recorded animation. And then there's the patent which revealed a system built to eliminate loading screens between multiplayer sessions altogether. Coming from GTA 5 Online with its infamously painstakingly long loading screens, it's a detail players genuinely found hard to picture. On November 8th, 2023, Rockstar finally broke a silence that had lasted over a year since the mega leaks. A tweet, signed personally by Sam Houser, revealing that they will release the first trailer for the next Grand Theft Auto in early December. Shortly after, Rockstar followed up with the specifics, but they wouldn't even get to keep that promise. On the evening of December 4th, less than 16 hours before the scheduled reveal, a low-quality version of the trailer leaked online. Because Rockstar had already uploaded the video to their YouTube channel unlisted and scheduled it, the back-end system staff used to manage videos was accessed, and the trailer was basically ripped from there. Of course, it began spreading like wildfire, and rather than having millions of fans view these low-quality, dodgy versions of the very first trailer for the game. Rockstar reacted fast, releasing the real trailer within a couple of hours, moving their premiere up from the next morning to that very same night. It didn't really matter though, since the trailer broke several YouTube records anyway. Within about 3 weeks of the trailer dropping, the investigators of the community had already zeroed in on the voice actor playing Lucia, the Puerto Rican actress Manny L. Perez. Now, besides the uncanny resemblance, Manny had already done minor voice work for Rockstar before, playing a blackjack dealer in the Diamond Casino update in GTA Online.
Betting is closed. Good luck. That's 15. Got 11. A blackjack. Win goes to the dealer.
In one resurfaced interview, a host brought up GTA and her expression visibly changed before she deflected the question. And in another clip, she talked about transitioning her career into voiceover and motion capture, mentioning she'd been attached to something big she couldn't discuss under NDA since 2021. Then there's a couple of details that are genuinely too crazy to be a coincidence. Manny Perez played a character on a 2022 CBS show called East New York, and the character's name is Lucia Santiago. On top of that, her resume lines up with a pattern. Manny L. Perez has appeared in Law & Order, and she's not the first GTA lead with that same show on their IMDb. Ned Luke, who played Michael DeSanta in GTA 5, was in Law & Order. Stephen Ogg, who played Trevor, and Michael Hollick, the voice of Nico Bellic, was in Law & Order too. Rockstar's home base is in New York, and Law & Order films there, so for Rockstar it practically became their unofficial casting pool. So with the trailer out and the internet doing its detective work, everybody was anticipating the next trailer and the initial 2025 set release date. But behind the curtain, Rockstar's relationship with its own workforce was starting to fracture. In 2023, Rockstar had pushed staff toward a mandatory 3-day office week, meaning staff had to actually show up to the office instead of being able to work remotely, a move that led to 170 UK employees signing a petition against it, one of the largest trade union actions the game industry had ever seen. Rockstar responded to staff with an employee-wide email stating, "This is not our first step to 5 days a week. We understand no one wants to go back to the old way of working." However, they did a complete U-turn and broke that promise less than a year later. On February 28th, 2024, Rockstar announced that from April 15th, the vast majority of staff would be required back in the office 5 full days a week, with remote access to company systems cut off entirely. For a lot of employees, this wasn't just an inconvenience. Many had built their entire lives around the flexibility Rockstar had promised to protect, relocating to different cities and taking on caregiving responsibilities specifically because remote work made it possible. The backlash was immediate. The IWGB, a UK trade union representing part of Rockstar's workforce, called it reckless decision-making, accusing leadership of ignoring workers' basic requests and going back on its word time and time again. Rockstar's own justification cited security concerns as one of the reasons for the mandate, referencing the leaks that had already plagued the project. But to a lot of employees, that reasoning didn't add up and fed into a much bigger fear that Rockstar was returning to the brutal crunch culture they'd built a reputation for after Red Dead 2. With staff now back in the office full-time, Rockstar and Take-Two pushed forward with confidence toward the initial release date. As late as February 2025, Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick told IGN he and the studio felt really good about hitting their fall 2025 target. But that confidence didn't last long, as even with all hands literally on deck, Rockstar had to break the news nobody wanted to hear. The game was delayed and pushed back to a specific date of May 26, 2026. Strauss backed the decision fully, knowing Rockstar needed this extra time, telling investors the studio was constantly seeking perfection. And just 4 days later, on May 6th, Rockstar dropped Trailer 2 and 70 screenshots of the game, clearly timed to soften the blow. They also overhauled the official website, revealing full character bios and location names across the state of Leonida for the very first time. The reaction to it was universally glowing, including from a name you'll already recognize. Mike Daly, one of the original co-creators of GTA back in 1997, publicly stated even if they'd released it broken, it'd still have sold hugely. So it's even more impressive they took the decision to delay it. Kudos. However, by fall 2025, another giant controversy was quietly brewing under the surface, and on October 30th, Rockstar suddenly fired between 30 and 34 employees across its UK and Canada offices in a single day. According to Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, the employees fired had one thing in common. They were all part of a private Discord server built around union organising. Rockstar's official reason was that the employees were let go for distributing and discussing confidential information in a public forum, a violation of company policy. But the IWGB saw it very differently, alleging that some of those fired had visas sponsored by Rockstar itself or medical conditions tied to their employment, meaning losing their job didn't just cost them a paycheck. It potentially cost them their healthcare or their right to remain in the country entirely. They described it as one of the most blatant and ruthless acts of union busting in the history of the gaming industry. And just 1 week later, on November 6, 2025, Rockstar delivered some news fans had been dreading for a second time. Another delay, this one pushing the release another 6 months past its already delayed date. Take-Two's stock dropped as much as 18% on the day of the announcement, the sharpest single-day hit the company had suffered throughout the entire development of this game. The new date, November 19th, 2026, is the one we're all still counting down to today. However, just a few months later, after the second delay announcement, Rockstar found themselves in the middle of yet another breach. On April 13th, 2026, a hacking group called Shiny Hunters leaked countless records stolen from Rockstar's internal systems after Rockstar refused to pay a $200,000 ransom. But this wasn't anything GTA 6 related. It was internal business analytics, financial and performance metrics for GTA Online and Red Dead Online. And what those numbers revealed floored everyone. Sure, we all knew GTA Online was profitable, but actually seeing the exact figures in black and white just hit differently. GTA Online alone has generated over $5 billion since launch, still pulling in more than $1 million a day, and $500 million per year, over a decade after GTA 5's original release. And of that, only around 4% of active players were actually spending real money, meaning a tiny sliver of the player base was basically carrying those statistics. But rather than these leaks hurting Rockstar, they did the exact opposite. Take-Two's stock shot up from around $202 to nearly $208 a share overnight, adding an estimated $1 billion to the company's valuation by lunch the next day. Then, on June 18th, 2026, over a year after Trailer 2, the GTA 6 drought was finally over, as Rockstar reignited the marketing machine, revealing the official cover art for the very first time. And despite plenty of doubts from fans convinced Rockstar would modernize it, the studio stuck with the iconic split-panel collage design, the same style they'd been using since GTA 3 in 2001, and used on every cover since. Alongside the cover art, pre-orders would officially open 1 week later on June 25th. And when that date arrived, Rockstar dropped a newswire and 63 new screenshots showing off the additions for the game, which unveiled a ton of new details nobody had seen before. The big running meme that GTA 6 would actually cost $100 was put to rest with the standard edition costing $80. But for the first time in the series, GTA went fully digital with no disc version planned at all, and the so-called physical version that comes with just a code in the box. Something, of course, many fans were not too happy about. And from pre-orders alone, analysts believe GTA 6 generated over $1 billion in its first 24 hours, some going as far as saying that number was hit in under an hour. On its launch week, the numbers are honestly anyone's guess. GTA 5 made over $1 billion within 3 days after it actually came out, a record that stood for over a decade. Since 2013, Rockstar has only kept expanding, and just like GTA 5 needed every one of their studios all working on the same project, GTA 6 of course would require the same thing, except on an even bigger scale. Reports suggest the game has been built by roughly 6,000 developers spread across 10 of the current active Rockstar studios worldwide. If there's one thing this franchise has proven time and time again, it's that records exist to be broken by whatever Rockstar releases next, and on November 19th I'm certain this one will not be any different. And that's going to wrap up the behind-the-scenes history of Grand Theft Auto from 1996 to June 2026. If you did enjoy, which, come on, I know you did, it would mean a lot to me if you subscribed to the channel and smashed that like button. I really tried to make this feel like you were time-travelling through GTA's last 30 years of chaos right alongside me. And if you felt even a bit of that, then I did my job. Anyway, like, subscribe, and until next time, take care.